Hello, and welcome to Mystic Dog Mama, the podcast for soul led dog mamas, where you'll discover how to best nourish your dog and yourself, mind, body, and soul. I'm your host, Dr. Alexia Meller. I'm so happy you're joining me today. Thank you for being here. If you've been listening to the podcast for a while, you'll notice that I say on a regular basis that our dogs are our mirrors, and that I believe that looking at what they are reflecting back to us is a big part of what it means to walk the spiritual path with our dogs. This also translates to our dogs' health issues and behavior issues, often being impacted by our own emotional and energetic states. In today's conversation, I talk with my guest, Rachel Knott, the owner of My Animal Matters, about how applying the practice of zoopharmacognosy with our dogs can open up an entire world of insights into the relationship between our dogs' health issues, behaviors, and ourselves. I know it sounds like the most incredible Scrabble word, and let me tell you, if you ever manage to accomplish that, you definitely have to take a photo of that board and send it to me. But zoopharmacognosy basically translates to animal medicine knowing and speaks to all animals' innate wisdom when it comes to healing, including our own. Whether you have a dog who has health or behavioral issues that you've struggled seeing success with, or you just want to learn how to better support your dog in staying healthy, or you want to learn about deepening your bond with your dog, then you're going to really get a lot out of this chat. Rachel shares her own story of how a wake-up call while working in the corporate world, then being made redundant, led her to working in Battersea Dogs Home in London, where her next chapter of working with dogs began. She also talks about how this journey with dogs helped her to see the relationship between our stress and our dog's stress, and how by learning the practices of deep listening, she's been able to support countless dogs and their owners on a journey back to physical, emotional, and spiritual health. Rachel does this by combining animal communication and botanical self-healing processes to help dogs communicate and access what it is that they need, which is not always what you think it is. And your dog isn't the only one who can benefit. She's also started to look at the other end of the leash. In collaboration with Dennis Liam Murphy, author of The Blame Game, Rachel offers the Animal Reflections program as a way to support pet parents on their healing journey, releasing many of the pent-up and buried emotions we carry around so that our animals can better heal. Rachel talks about all of these topics in this episode and shares some fantastic client success stories of how she's seen dogs benefit from the processes of botanical self-healing. From a border collie suffering from obsessively chasing shadows, to dogs with allergies and skin issues, and even her own dog who displayed aggressive behavior. She also shares how you can start to experiment with the practice of self-selection with your own dog today by using some simple items you probably already have in your kitchen cupboards. So, if you're ready, let's go! Hi, Rachel. I am so thrilled to welcome you to the Mystic Dog Mama podcast today. Thanks for joining us.
You're very welcome. I don't think we're alone, actually, by the looks of things.
I know. Little Lucky's like, oh, I want to be involved in this conversation. Well, you can tell us what you think, Lucky. I'm sure he will be. Here we go. It's so funny. Rachel, we have been trying to have this conversation for a while, and I am absolutely thrilled that we're actually having it because your work is just so fascinating to me and so resonant. And honestly, I think it's so needed in how we process the way that we engage with our dogs, but also how we are engaging with ourselves. And I think the two really need to be looked at together because we're in a state where we are going through these kinds of accelerations of, if you want to call it like ascension, or you want to call it deconditioning, or whatever language you want to use around it. But
we're in this position now where we're being asked to really rethink who we think we are and how we show up in the world. And our dogs are right there guiding us along the way. And your work just marries all of that together. So I'm so thrilled to take a deep dive today and hear a little bit more about what it is that you're doing and how you got into that and how people can both work with you as well as apply some of the concepts that we're going to be talking about today with their own dog today. So I'm really
Yeah,
excited for this.
absolutely. Same.
Yay. So I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about your story with how you got into My Animal Matters.
Yeah, sure. Oh, I mean, it's a long time ago, probably about 24 years that I started working with dogs, 24 years ago. So I would kind of went through quite a traditional upbringing. I went to school, I went to university, and then it's like I was quite good at languages. So I went and studied languages and then worked in the corporate world in London. And I just remember sitting at my desk, and I was in recruitment, which makes me laugh now. I was in recruitment. I remember sitting at my desk with all my targets on the wall, and I was just like, what is this? I don't get it. Like, what is the purpose of this stuff and these numbers and me in this suit? And after about 2 weeks of me having this moment, I was made redundant, which was such incredible timing because had I have had would I have had the confidence to just leave at that point?
Mhm.
Possibly not. So I was made redundant, and I was in my late 20s, and I was thinking, what do I actually like? What do I actually really love in life? What do I really love doing? Thought, well, I've always loved dogs. And obviously, living in London, the biggest place with the most amount of dogs is Battersea Dogs Home. So I went and volunteered there and very quickly got a job as a rehomer, which is someone that interviews the public and then matches them up with the dogs. So that's where it started. And then my desire and thirst for learning about dogs it was insatiable. So I went from working at Battersea Dogs Home. I then took what probably quite little knowledge I had at that point, left London, moved to Oxfordshire, set up a daycare and dog walking business at the time when actually there weren't really any regulations or limits on the number of dogs, and there wasn't really anyone else doing it. So we had loads of dogs coming into our place. So then I learned about stress. I learned about all the different behaviors that dogs were, I wanted to learn about what was the emotion driving the behavior. So I've never really been someone that's into training. That's not my area of expertise. I wanted to understand what was going on for them emotionally. So then I went and trained with a lady called Sheila Harper, learned all about like body language, stress, and actually that was the point where my life kind of imploded, because as we were learning about dog stress, and I didn't really have the awareness I have now, I very stressed as a person. So we were running the dog business, we had our own dogs. There were lots of behaviors that my dogs were throwing out, and I was like, I don't know how to deal with this. And I kind of had a breakdown at that point, and something had to change. And I then we'll probably get into this a little bit later. I started working with a friend, Dennis Murphy, who I now co-created a course with called the Animal Reflections Program. So I started to work with him with me. So my focus was no longer just the dogs. So I'm starting to run parallels a little bit. So as much as I'm focusing on the dogs, I'm now starting to do a little bit of self work, a little bit of self-awareness. Up until that point, I'd had absolutely none whatsoever. And then from the dog behavior, I was just like, there's still things I'm not getting with my own dog, because I feel like there's something missing. And then Sheila Harper brought Caroline Ingraham in to do a workshop for the day. And this would have been about 12, 13 years ago. I remember seeing her work with some of the dogs and offering essential oils and offering hydrosols and just watching how she worked with a dog. And it was all about the dog guiding the session, the dog knowing what they needed to help themselves heal. And my mind was blown, because I'm like, I've been working with dogs for 10 years. Number one, I've never heard of this before. And number two, that dog is behaving so differently from how he normally behaves. And I literally felt like I'd come home. I was like, this is the thing. And I had no background in essential oils, no background in herbs. I just knew that there was something that she was doing that I was like, I need to learn from her. So then I went and trained with Caroline Ingraham. I'm doing it chronologically
Yeah,
here.
yeah.
Went and trained with Caroline Ingraham. And once I'd done my training, I kind of came away feeling like, I don't know, I feel like, yeah, I understand the therapeutic properties of the essential oils. I understand how to hold a session and like the foundation of all of it. But I thought, I don't really know the essential oils on a deeper level. I kind of just know what their properties are. I felt like a bit of a fraud going to see clients because I thought, I'm offering these oils, but I actually haven't really got a connection them beyond what I've learned. So, you know, when you're learning something, you learn it at like a superficial level. I hadn't really integrated it to a point of wisdom, I guess. I then went and did loads of learning about how to connect with the aromatics myself. So I trained with a lady called Kathy Skipper, went to New Mexico, learned about the energy of the plants. And then I just started to bring that side of things into the self-selection with the dogs, as well as the human element. So I know I've jumped around a lot, but that's because I bring in so many different elements into my sessions. That's brought me to where I am now, which is integrating the animal communication, the self-selection, but also the human side of things, what we're broadcasting, what we're bringing to the table, and what the animals are showing us about ourselves.
Oh, that's
Don't know that I've
beautiful.
answered your question. I feel
No,
like
you
I've
have.
answered a lot of questions in one go.
You have, but we're going to dive into it more because I think it's so rich and it's so important. And there are so many aspects of your story that I think are relevant to everyone, really. Like that sense too where you started off with having this kind of realization moment of like, what on earth am I doing? I can relate to the whole corporate thing and being like, this feels so disconnected to who I actually am. And it often takes like the universe's 2x4 hitting you over the head kind of thing, whether that's a forced redundancy or an illness or an accident or something kind of comes along to shake things up and forces into the next thing. And we often have to do that very blindly, not knowing what it is that we're actually going into. But there's often, I talked about this in the first episode of the podcast about connecting with how you understand purpose within yourself, and how lucky has been a huge teacher for me with that, because I used to think that purpose was this external thing, like my purpose would be working with dogs, or my purpose would be serving humanity, or something like that. It was always something external, and generally something so big that it felt both overwhelming and I didn't really know how to even enter into that. But my feeling on purpose anyway, and I'd love to hear more about your thoughts on this, is that it's just that little bit, that tug, that little feeling that pulls us towards something. And that something can be as simple as, I feel like a cup of tea right now. Or that something can be, you know what, I've always liked working with dogs and I'd kind of like to just go volunteer in the shelter for a bit. Right. And it's our job to take action, those small actions that then lead us to where it is that we are being pulled towards.
Yeah, yeah. I think, I guess what I'd add to that is we've become so good at lying to ourselves.
Mm,
We've become so good at deceiving ourselves that we don't know who we honestly are anymore. And
yeah.
this is what our dogs are teaching us, is who we honestly are and what we honestly want. But it's so uncomfortable because we've spent no time in that space. So often we have to then co-create these more extreme experiences like the redundancy or the sickness to help us pivot along that path
Yeah.
where we're like, this is what feels good. And I think it's also knowing that we're constantly changing. I don't necessarily subscribe to that we have one purpose. Like I think we're always evolving. And because we are in a symbiotic, or this is how I see it, we're in a symbiotic with everything, symbiotic relationship with everything in life. There's this evolution that we may not be consciously aware of, but unconsciously we may get pulled towards something, and we're like, oh, I hadn't seen that one coming, and then we go in a completely different direction. But I think we're always changing, and it is following those. I think a lot of people think they're waiting for this massive epiphany, this conscious clarity for something, but actually, because we don't know who we honestly are anymore, that's too difficult. So it's following the little threads of, I'm kind of pulled to that, and on the way of following that, then we get to know who we are and what we honestly
Yeah.
want. But that's the bit that has become very difficult due to this kind of fake positivity, the suppression of emotions, and so many different things. But
Absolutely. I
yeah,
agree with that 100%. 100%.
yeah.
And I think to your point, this is what dogs are teaching us, or a big part of what they're teaching us. And I think it's really interesting that you're kind of exploring this in a particular avenue right now with, and I'm sure I'm going to mess this up. This is one of those words that, like you'll say a word over and over, like hand or something, and all of a sudden the word
Ah,
becomes really weird. You're like, that's such a weird word. I have this
yeah.
problem with Zoopharmacognosy. I always like mess it up. So if I've messed it up, please correct me. But
You
is
said
that
it
okay?
perfectly.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah,
Thank you. Because in my head, I'm like, oh,
perfect.
that sounds weird now. But zoopharmacognosy, which is what you studied and worked with Caroline Ingraham on, correct? That's the self-selection.
Correct.
I
Yeah.
wondered if you could talk to us a little bit more about what that actually is. What does that entail?
Yeah, sure. So if I take the word first of all, just to break it down a little bit. So zoopharmacognosy means animal remedy knowing. So it's the idea that animals, including ourselves, have the ability to self-medicate, self-heal on plant medicine. So they innately know what it is their mind, body, soul needs from the plant kingdom, and other things too, but specifically zoopharmacognosy's animal remedy knowing. So obviously there are examples in the wild of animals self-medicating on plants. Dr. Michael Huffman is the main guy. If you want to do some research about animals in the wild, he there's some videos on YouTube where he talks about apes, chimps, I think it's chimps, self-medicating on a certain leaf to help get rid of parasites. So there are examples of animals in the wild, but Caroline Ingraham pioneered probably about 30 years ago what she then called applied zoopharmacognosy. So it's basically working with an animal's innate wisdom to be able to self-medicate on plants, but bringing that to our domesticated animals. So even though they've been domesticated, they still possess that ability to know what it is they need, how much it is they need, and how they need it. So on like a really basic level, think of a dog. When dogs eat grass, they're not just going out, they don't go out to the garden and just like eat any random grass, do they? They're super specific on which ones it is they need, and it's that skill. And it's probably a little bit more people that have horses and that let their horses forage, they may eat rose hips or they may eat cleavers at certain times of year. So it's understanding that they know what it is they need, as do we, but we just haven't given them that opportunity, and we haven't necessarily had the awareness of it. So yeah, and there's loads of different names for it now. I call it botanical self-healing, it's self-select. There's so many names for it. But whatever the name is, the core, the foundation is they know. It's just they need us to create the opportunity for them to be able to choose what it is they need.
Mm-hmm. We're hearing about that a lot more in the canine nutrition world as well, with, for example, creating food platters for your dog, where instead of mixing everything together or having things touching, you actually separate things out so you can get a better sense of what your dog actually likes, for one. But also we start to see that they know exactly what it is they need and don't need at certain times. So I've noticed with playing around with it with Lucky that there are times that he really just wants a raw meaty bone and he's not interested in muscle meat. And a lot of times he's not really interested in the organ meat. And then one day of the week, that's all that he wants that day. And so it's been really interesting to see that when I give him choice, because I think this is a big part of what you're speaking to, that it's up to us as the guardians to provide the context in which they can start to choose, where they have access to choice, what it is that they start to do rather than imposing, well, I've heard that he's supposed to have this every single day, or it's got to look like this, and actually trust that he knows what it is that he wants, in the same way that there are some days where he asks for like seconds and thirds of his, in terms of servings. And then other days he's not really bothered with eating because he's had, 3 servings the day before, but trusting that he has some sort of wisdom, as you're saying, for knowing exactly what it is that his body needs at both a kind of physiological level, but also at a more energetic level.
And
Yeah.
and how it's so simple, isn't it? At its core, it's so simple. But the reason we struggle with it is that we've given all of our responsibility for our health over to experts. And so we're like, what? Like, how on earth can a domesticated dog know what they need when we're like, we trust, we put all of our power or give all of our power away to experts? So really gone with selection is I've become so much more aware of how my body is 24/7 giving me feedback. Or like, I'll get feelings about what foods I'm drawn to, or if there's certain supplements I feel I need, but we're all individual, and this is the same with our dogs. So it's individualized medicine. What I may need one day, you may not need another day. So when we start to embrace, okay, they're guiding us, maybe there's something in this. And
Right.
it's not to say that experts don't have their place, because they give us information, but I think it's important to question the kind of the generalizations that we accept from experts.
Yeah.
And actually, what is your dog saying? What does your dog need?
Right.
And coming from that place and really listening to them. But that's so hard for us as humans because of what we've been taught about the body, that the body is failing us, it's breaking down, it's messing things up, which makes no sense. Why would our body be designed to be malfunctioning 24/7? Our body, just like our animal's body, is a barometer or a transmitter, for want of a better word, on what it's a tool of communication.
Right.
Like when you think about when we get thirsty, we get symptoms, don't we? So just before the call, I was saying I've not drunk enough today, and I can notice it because my mouth is dry. And if I don't drink, I may then get a headache. And if I don't drink, like my skin might start to get dry. And so the body's talking to us 24/7 about, it's like, give me more water, give me more water. But if we're like, oh, I'm getting headaches, so I better just go and take a pill, or we'll Google something and we'll be like, oh, headache means this, and then we'll buy into a label, and we now got a label. So it's about going back to basics again,
Mhm.
and our
Mhm.
animals really can help us understand the simplicity of how innate that knowing is of what it is we need so we can thrive.
Mhm. Absolutely. And I think part of the issue, to build off of what you were saying around giving our power away to experts, is also the way that we've been conditioned to think of the body as a mechanical machine. And that
Yeah.
there's this sort of perspective of like what goes in comes out. And I mean, even Dr. Giles Yeo talks about sort of discounting the way that we even think about calories, that concept doesn't actually work for how the body is engaging with nutrition. And we know this from studying canine nutrition too, that when you look at for example, bioavailability and how the body is actually engaging with what is being put into the body is so much more complex, but actually so much more simple at the same time than the way we think of it from a kind of machine oriented perspective. And I think like the work that you're doing is so important because it is beyond what it is that we're giving to our dogs or how we're engaging with them with what's going into their bodies, but it's about radically changing the perspective, our worldview. Really, it's about changing our worldview. And so much of it is about, from my perspective, anyways, and from the little bit that I've done with Lucky around self selection, that it's building a trust, not just in him, but in myself, like really getting to trust myself again. And it's been amazing
Mm.
how much that issue has come up and the fears around trusting myself and the fears of even understanding my own body has been amazing to see. And I'm somebody that's done a lot of work on this stuff. So it's just incredible how much we are conditioned. Like you're saying, we've been conditioned this way. But I'd like to dive in a bit with what does it look like for you to actually
Mm.
apply self-selection with dogs?
Do you know, it's such a beautiful thing to do, and I've just started doing it a lot more recently on Zoom because of
Oh,
the
amazing.
pandemic and everything. Yeah, and I remember like training many years ago. I was like, "There's no way this can be done online." So I've been doing a couple of sessions this last week with some dogs, and it's fascinating having to set up the environment, like guiding the guardian on how to read the signals. So there are actually, even though at its core it's really simple, the animals know what it is they need. The tricky bit is the listening and the observation, and that's the bit that needs nurturing and practice, essentially. So bringing the botanicals to the dog is the first thing. So it's offering them a selection of, it could be dried herbs, it could be dried powders like chlorella, spirulina, barley grass. It could be essential oils, hydrosols, which I work with a lot, with the hydrosols, which are the water soluble parts of the plant. So you're bringing the aromatics, the botanicals to the dog, and then it's the process of offering and observing what they are saying. So with the dried herbs, it's generally a little bit easier to understand because they'll either like choose to roll in them or they'll sniff or ingest them. With the aromatics, that's when you have to really hone your observation skills because our sense of smell is so naff compared to dogs, isn't it? I mean, that's the best word, really. It's just a bit naff. So when we smell an essential oil, we literally stick it under our nose, don't we? Whereas for a dog, I mean, sometimes you don't even need to take the lid off and they're already connecting with the aromatics. So it's offering that oil and then sitting back and really watching what they're doing. Are their nostrils going? Are they licking the air? Are they yawning? Have they changed from standing up to sitting down? Or have they just left the room? Because this is the other thing. As much as we're like, oh, I want to see if my dog needs anything. And like we shut the door and shut the windows. And I'm like, I want you to check out this stuff. There's a pressure, isn't there, coming from us? So it's really important to make sure that even though you're offering them choices, so maybe different herbs or different essential oils, you're also offering them the choice of, do you want anything? Or now they're not the right time? Or do I need something? Because I've had it where I'd go and work with clients and the dog would just leave the room. Absolutely. Even though they had, health conditions, there were behaviours that the guardian was struggling with, the dog would just be like, nah, I'm out of here. And I had to honor that. And that's when I started to work with the people a little bit. I'm like, okay, well, and just from a playful energy initially, I'm like, oh, well, maybe let's just us hang out and smell some oils. And then interestingly, the dog might then come back in because they're like, well, number one, the pressure is off. Number two, you feel different because you're now relaxed. Whereas before you were stressed and trying to offer me something to calm. So it's like this. And I remember this so clearly within myself when I was training. because I was at a point when I had a lot of stress in my life, a very stressed person, and my dog had skin condition. He had lots of itchiness, itchy ears, itchy paws, which was a lot of reflection back on me with my stress levels. And I was like, look, this oil's really good for, inhibiting the excitatory neurons in the brain, helping you calm down. Why aren't you smelling it? But I'm like, even though I'm saying I'm giving him choices, I'm not, because every part of me wants him to relax. So I'm offering him these oils, but not recognizing that I'm stressed. So once I started to sit with the oils, I'd be like, oh, okay. And then they would come in. So it's like, as much as the focus is, I'm here to help you with the dogs, I'm here to listen. Sometimes we really have to pivot how we do it, because they're leaving the room. It could be, number one, they don't need it. Or it could be that if we work with them and we experience them a little bit, they may then be curious. And there may be something that we need that they need.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I'm sure you see this as well with animal communication, because we both do animal communication work. And I see it with Reiki as well, that I'll get asked to work on an animal and the animal doesn't necessarily want the Reiki. I mean, animals are very receptive to Reiki generally, but it's like, it's not actually the animal that needs it. It's the person that needs it. And I see that time and time again reflected back, that the animal is actually showing either like health issues or behavioral issues or what have you, that trigger the owner to look for something, right? To look for some sort of solution, because it's the owner that actually needs it. And it's like the animal has figured out on some sort of energetic way that that's the way to communicate. That's to kind of sort of embody an issue in order that the owner go and seek help. But I think that's also because, going back to what we were saying about giving our trust away to experts, we tend to view everything through an allopathic lens, meaning we see a problem and we just want to fix it. We want to get rid of those symptoms. And we do this to our animals too. Oh my gosh, they're showing something. I've got to fix it. And even those of us that are more interested in a holistic perspective, we still have that embedded within us, that, oh, there's something wrong. Instead of a drug, I'm going to look for what herb can I apply to this, for example. And I think it's still the same fundamental problem. And what you're offering with the self-selection process is saying, well, let's actually get rid of all of that. And let's just explore, what do we within this ecosystem need? Because when you're in a household with your animal, it is an ecosystem and you're feeding off of one another all of the time. All of the time.
Yeah. I'll share with you a story of a dog I used to run workshops in person, and I loved doing this because it is such a good way for people to be able to actually see the process in action. So you can read about self-selection and you get it on one level, but until you actually see it, it kind of sometimes doesn't really go in. And I was running a workshop. There were about 14 people, and this lady had brought in her dog, which was a border collie. And she was an aromatherapist. So I was like, great, she's already familiar with essential oils. And she came in a little bit late. She was a little bit stressed. And I was like, okay, well, let's work with you first. Let's work with your dog first. And the reason she'd come to the workshop is because he shadow chased. And do you know what I mean? But yeah, cool.
Yeah.
So he shadow chased, and he actually did it in the room when we started offering the botanicals. So we were all sat in a semicircle, and she's talking about the behavior that really triggers her, this shadow chasing. And I'm like, okay, well, let's just explore. Let's see if there's anything that he needs to, see if we can unpack this a little bit. And I literally just opened up a bottle of violet leaf, and he started shadow chasing around the room. And I'm like, okay, that's interesting. And I was like, is it the oil? Is it the pressure? Is it, what's going on for him right now? And I thought, let's strip it back. Let's go to what he's comfortable with, because this is like really alien environment for him to be in. So I said, is there anything that you've offered him at home before that he enjoys? And she's like, yeah, sometimes he has spirulina, sometimes he has coconut oil. And I thought, great, okay, for the purposes of demonstration for the rest of the group also, let's just give him a couple of things that he can, self-soothe and also demonstrate the power of self-selection. So he's doing his little thing in the back of the room, and she says to me, actually, can I go and sit next to him? And I'm like, oh, I don't know, because I kind of he's in his zone at the minute. But I say yes, because I think, you're a unit. I sit next to him. She goes to sit next to him, and he moves away and starts shadow chasing again. And I'm like, God, isn't that fascinating? And so I had to just pivot. I'm like, there's something else going on here. So I said to her, what, is there an oil you enjoy? And she's like, oh, I love ginger. So I gave her ginger essential oil, and he's wandering around the room, jumping on shadows. And then she bursts into tears, and she said, my husband died a year ago, and I haven't processed that grief. And she'd obviously been bottling it up. But as soon as she said that, the dog stopped shadow chasing and lay down on the floor and just completely relaxed in that moment. And I was like, it was such a game-changing moment for me, because I as much as she tried everything to stop her dog from shadow chasing, helping him relax and changing the environment, doing all of the right things, changing his diet, the one thing she hadn't considered was, what is running in the background for her 24/7, and it's this deep grief, sadness. So often our dog, I'm going off a bit of a tangent here, but often the behaviors our dogs are showing isn't necessarily, sometimes it's a bit cryptic. It's not that she's shadow chasing or whatever, it's just that's his way of processing and dealing with 24/7, that he's picking up on this emotion within her. But because she's trying to cover it up, burying it, his behavior just had to get more extreme for her to really listen and do something about it. So that moment of like, this is actually what I'm honestly feeling, and to feel it within herself. And maybe the oil helped her access that. Maybe, who knows what the catalyst was for it, but it was so profound for me to understand that we have to work together with our dogs. And this kind of like, I need your symptoms to go away. Well, maybe the symptoms are just signs that something needs addressing. Maybe something needs listening to, but it's not something that needs suppressing or made to go away. It's information.
Exactly. And I think that's the case with all dis-ease, that it's
Yeah.
communication, that there's not an appropriate flow in the body, and then various traditions assign meaning to different parts of the body, so that when there is an issue in that part, there's something to kind of refer to, that it could be representing, like you're saying, like grief or anger or sadness or fear or what have you. And those are just signals for us to embrace with curiosity. And again, like you're saying, not to get rid of, but actually to go within and ask ourselves, what is this teaching me? What do I need to learn from this? And our dogs are just exhibiting, they're externalizations in many respects. Their behaviors are externalizations of that thing that we can't quite see in ourselves. And we need something to mirror it back. And I say all the time that dogs are our mirrors, and in so many ways. And what you're speaking about is like just another example of how they mirror to us. What a gift.
Yeah. And but it's a very uncomfortable gift at times as well, though.
Yes, it is.
Like, that's the truth of it. Like, there's times when I'm like, man, this mirroring stuff, I can't be doing with it today. But that's because the things they're mirroring back are stuff that we don't like about ourselves. And I know we've so gone off on a tangent, haven't we, Alexia? But I'm going to share this with you. So Cosmo, the little Boston Terrier that we helped transition last week, he's probably been the most challenging dog I've ever lived with. And I've had a lot of dogs, like through, looking after them in daycare and fosters and my own dogs. And he threw up some challenges for me, because his behavior he was quite shouty, and he was quite belligerent, and he right. So I'm recognizing these mirrors. But he did things that I'm like, I don't get that. I don't see that in myself. And I would be like so vehement that I am not like that on any level. So let me think of an example. So yeah, so I would have described him as an angry little dog. But because I've been taught that anger's bad, like anger's a bad emotion, and if you're not suppressing anger, then you need to be controlling it or denying it or getting rid of it. But I learned that anger is actually just like all our emotions, it's just energy, isn't it? It's just energy that wants listening to. So once I really started to understand that side of things, I could then see the mirror in Cosmo. But those moments, the way he would behave towards me, because other people would find his behavior funny. They'd be like, haha, that's funny. But for me, it triggered anger in me. And it's not because his behavior was bad, but it's because it triggered that emotion in me. I'd spent my whole life covering up that I had any anger because I've learned to be a nice person. I'm not saying I'm not nice. I am nice, guys, as well. But I'm saying we're taught, particularly as women, to be nice, grateful, loving, the nurturer. And they're all very beautiful feminine qualities, but we also have so many other sides of ourselves, and a lot of the emotion that we've inherited that we've learned to deny or call bad or negative or wrong, and we'll do all of this stuff to try and get rid of it. And we've got really good at burying it deep. So Cosmo was the catalyst for me, and flippin' heck was it uncomfortable. But I learned how to really sit with that in my body. So my body was talking to me. So I learned how to sit with that. So when he would trigger me, I'd be like, right, I'm going to feel that now, that anger, that rage. I'm going to feel it in my body. And I'm not going to call it bad. I'm not going to try and get rid of it. I'm literally going to watch it and listen to it and feel it. And my relationship with him completely changed. Don't get me wrong, there were moments where I'm thinking, you're still a bit of a dickhead. But aren't we all? But for the whole relationship, I went from finding him like a really challenging dog to actually really loving him and finding him quite funny. So historically, I would have tried to change him. I would have been like, you need to change. I need to do all the things to change you. But I understood that it's both ways. Like it's both. He really was such a great teacher for me.
Absolutely. Oh my goodness. I can relate to a lot of that with Lucky. He's he definitely has some characteristics that can be really aggravating at times. And I have to stop and look at what's going on with me. And I even look at too the way that he is when I'm talking to different guests, for example, and how he behaves and the kind of energy exchange that he wants to get involved with. And if I'm spending like a lot of time in front of the computer, for example, he comes and does the thing that he did just before we started recording, where you saw him like come up and he just puts his paw on me. Yep. And it's a big reminder for me to kind of check back in with myself of, okay, what kind of energy am I emitting right now? Or have I been spending way too much time in front of this screen? And he's reminding me like, hey, this is here. This is the now. Come back into this with me. Whereas when I don't have that kind of awareness, I can start to get annoyed, like, oh, for God's sake, Lucky, just stop, But in reality, when I'm able to be present and say, okay, you're asking me to look at myself. Because I also used to think I would turn to him and say, what do you need? What's wrong? What do you want? And he's looking at me like, it's not me, it's you. you're the one who needs it. And it's been just that slight reframing has been just so expansive for me. And like you're saying with your relationship with Cosmo, it's changed the way that I look at Lucky's behaviors and the way I feel about them as a result. And I think that's the key thing, is that the feeling has changed about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they feel that shift in us, don't they? And it's
Totally.
like that moment going back to the border collie, how long had he been exhibiting those behaviors until that moment where she actually, instead of suppressing and denying that grief and trying to push it away, she actually finally felt it and like owned it, not in a blamey way, just as in I'm sad, like I feel sad, and the dog just, it's like, can relax now. So yeah, but it's not always easy, and that, but I like pushing through the difficult stuff because there's freedom on the other side,
Right.
and that, but it's not something I've ever done alone. You know, I've always had a guide. I always have a teacher. I always have a guide, someone that's helping me. You know, if I'm really struggling with someone, I think that's also important to say. You know, we need, like, again, maybe as women, we think we've got to work it all out ourselves. We've got to carry it all on our own. But actually, it's so important to be able to reach out and say, I'm struggling and I need someone. I need a guide. I need someone that's
Absolutely.
one step ahead of me, that
Yeah.
that can teach me. And
Something that's
that's,
oh, sorry. Go ahead.
no one goes.
I think you're absolutely right. And something that I came across that has been incredibly important and helpful for me in my own journey with this was coming across the text A Course in Miracles. And during the pandemic, I actually did the year-long workbook, which is basically a lesson per day. And A Course in Miracles is designed to help you to see how you are co-creating the world around you and that everything is a projection. So the way it's really about the way in which you are interpreting the world, that there is no separation, that this is all an illusion of your own making. And so as a result of that, empowering you to change how it is that you are seeing what's occurring with you. But they talk about the importance of having what they refer to as a holy relationship with somebody versus what they call a special relationship. And a special relationship would be something that's based off of ego. And so there's often like manipulation and you get hurt. And I'm not talking about romantic relationships per se, but I'm meaning just any kind of relationship where we are meeting the other person ego to ego level versus a holy relationship where it is about that soul to soul level. And that the gift of that is you commit to being able to see one another as the holy self that they are, as the divine, their divine nature, so that when you are failing to see that in yourself, when you're struggling with the journey, like you're saying, this is not an easy thing to do, but that you have somebody there who can reflect back to you, they see it in you. They
Mm,
see your divine nature and they're holding that vision for you as you're working through the stuff on the surface that's kind of clouding that for you. And I think it we I think it is as women. I think it's also in our Western culture, which has a very kind of independent mindset that we think we're meant to do everything ourselves and be everything ourselves. That is just so destructive because the reality is we can't do everything ourselves. We don't live in a vacuum. We are all threads in this tapestry, informing one another and supporting one another. That you do need to reach out to teachers. You know, your dog is a teacher, your neighbor is a teacher, everyone's a teacher. But I think with like what you're talking about, the kind of work that you're doing, it's important to have somebody that is knowledgeable, that has witnessed this go on before. And so you can offer that person a support when all of this crap comes up to the surface and you're like, I don't even know what to do with this. So could you maybe talk a little bit about how you would actually work with somebody if they were interested in coming to you for some of these sorts of sessions?
for the self-selection,
Mhm.
or
Well,
yeah.
yeah. Well, because I know self-selection is embedded in a lot of what that you do. So how would you support somebody who's interested in exploring this way of working with their dog?
Oh, where do I begin? You know, it's, so I do a lot of teaching. That's my main focus. So I do a lot of teaching people to practitioner level, and the way I've taught it has evolved from being purely about the dog to now I get the students to get to know the oils themselves, and to go on that plant journey, to then bringing in the reflection, the self-reflection. So it really depends on where the person is at and what they're looking for, because some people will come to me and they're right at the start of their journey, and they simply want the basics of zoopharmacognosy. So they want to be able to give the dog some, you know, see if there's any herbs they need, or if there's anything that can just help them relax. So so that's one level, but then there are other people that have been following me for a while that know I am going on this unusual journey of, as Dennis Lee Murphy, the guy that I'm working with on the animal reflection side of thing, exiting the blame cycle. So there are people that are following me and that have gone on the course that are starting to work with me in that way. So it's really, I find it really hard to explain it because there's so many different facets. People come to me for lots of different things, and they'll think they're coming for the Zoopharmacognosy, and then the classic situation, the dog leaves the room and we end up discussing, what's going on for them. What is there something that they need to be working with? So kind of like you were talking before, the catalyst, they think their dog has got an issue, but it's not that, it's just something needs addressing. So yeah, I find it quite hard to answer that question because because everyone's reason for coming is so different, so it's quite hard to say specifically.
Well, I guess to kind of give people a picture of like what a session would look like. So if somebody is coming to you, which is probably one of the most common things of like, I've got these issues with my dog. How do I get rid of it? I don't want to go down the pharmaceutical route. I'm interested in the more holistic thing. What would it look like in that kind of first session? Or what would you guide them to be doing if you're doing like a Zoom session, for example, and they're setting it up in their home? What might that look like?
Yeah, so I bring in the animal communication side more now, which is why the Zoom has been great, because it's meant that I can't rock up with a massive kit. So now I have to connect energetically with the animal first. So they would send me a questionnaire, and we'd have a bit of a chat, find out what it is they're struggling with. But then I'll connect energetically with the animal, mostly dogs that I work with, and send them a basic kit. So like a couple of essentials, a couple of hydrosols, and a couple of herbs. And then within an hour, I'm basically guiding them through the process of learning how to observe their dog. And very often, some dogs can be really animated, like they've never done this before. I was working with one of my students the other day, and she's got a Doberman. He was just like, he was in everything. He's like getting out the bags and wanted to check it all out. And it looked initially like he wasn't being discerning because he was so desperate for something. And it was only when he stuck his head in the box that we hadn't given him access to that he pulled out, he pointed with his nose the exact one he wanted, which was the seaweed. Yeah, so
Wow.
it can be it's a very immersive experience, but sometimes it's, you're having to move really quickly because the dog knows what they're doing and we're trying to play catch up. But other times it'll be, I worked with a Tibetan Terrier the other day, and she was a wise master, that dog, and she was so clear on what it was she wanted, but she wanted her mum to work with Rose, so they both worked with Rose. And what happened was the session felt like the dog wasn't really that interested. There was something just not quite, I don't know, when you're like, we haven't quite got there. And then when we offered the Rose, it was just like, wow, something just opened up. So whether it was that we all loved Rose and then we all relaxed and then the dog felt that change, or whether there's something about, who knows, but the dog shifted so subtly, but so starkly energetically. And the guardian really started to open up and you could just feel it shift. So it can be, sometimes it's really subtle and we think nothing is happening. Like I worked with a dog many years ago. It was off the back of a workshop and she had a skin, like half the fur had fallen out her back end. And she tried her on steroids and, lots of different medication. And I was running a workshop, and the next day she's like, look, can we just do a session together to see if there's anything she needs? And I'm at the time thinking, blimey, you've tried loads of things. I don't know if I can help. Like that's where it was at the time. And I remember sitting down with this dog in like a classroom setting where we'd run the workshop with the dog's mum and another lady. and we just offered a couple of oils, but it was a really beautiful space where we were just sitting together and just watching the dog and not really doing much. Like, we offered frankincense, we offered rose, but we were very much in that kind of listening, observing, just kind of enjoying each other's company and enjoying the process. And I was not putting any pressure on myself or the dog, because I'm thinking, I don't know if this is going to help. Let's just see what happens. I completely came in with that energy. And it was about a 90-minute session, and we were all like, oh, that was really lovely. She was so clear on what she selected. She went from the frankincense to the rose, and then she maybe take a little bit of spirulina, and then did her thing, and then we ended it. And she messaged me, I can't remember the timeline because it was years ago, but a couple of weeks later, she's like, her fur is growing back. And then she sent me photos. It's all completely back. And I'm like, I felt like I'd done nothing. But of course, we'd done a lot because we hadn't been putting pressure on her. There was no there was so many other things. We've created that space where we're just really listening and allowing her to do what she innately knows how to do, and that's self-heal. So, you know, again, I don't know what specifically happened. I don't know, was it the oils? Was it the space? Was it timing as well?
All of it.
All of those things. All of those things. And that, so I never know what's going to happen. I never know what's coming to the table. But I love that. Like, I love the not knowing. And I'm also, every time I'm going into a session, I'm aware that that client is giving me feedback about me. So if I've got a client, I'm like, really hard work, or there's something about them I don't like, and I can't pinpoint it. And you know, every part of me is thinking, I don't want to work with them. I want to pass them on to someone else. Then I'm like, oh, okay, maybe I need to do the mirror exercise and be really clear on what it is I don't like about that person. And then I'll be like, oh, I do that in the car. That thing that she's doing, I do that in the car. You know, it's just sometimes it can be so subtle. And then I'll be like, oh, okay. And the next time I see them, they're super friendly and really open. I'm like, oh, what's changed? Oh, me. So I'm not coming at them with their, I mean, they would have picked that up from me as well.
Right.
That dislike, that brings back another memory of going to see this one lady. Again, it's always the funny ones, the ones years ago where I had pretty much zero self-awareness. And I'd gone, this one lady had heard about Zoopharmacognosy, and she had this really big dog. I can't remember what breed he was. And she said, he's really stressed, you know, the usual stuff. He's really stressed. He's really anxious. I want you to see if there's any essential oils he'll select. But it's really important that when you come in, when he jumps up at you, you've got to give him loads of fusses. And so she was a dog trainer, and I had just finished my dog training, and I would have been very self-righteous at this point. And I would have been going, well, no, I know that if dogs jump up, you're going to turn your back. So I'm going in thinking, I'm not going to listen to what you're saying. I'm going to do what I know, because you're a trainer and I'm a behaviourist. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to ignore the dog, right? So this is what's going on. So I go in and I meet the dog. The dog, fair enough, puts his paws on my shoulders, and I do what I've learned is the right thing to do, and I turn my back on the dog. And anyway, as you'll be not surprised to find, is the dog did not engage in the session at all. Like, he would not select anything. He just was completely like, no. And I left feeling very disappointed and thinking, God, like, I don't know what went wrong in that session. But now I understand that I've gone in it with this self-righteous energy, as in, you don't know what you're talking about. I know what I'm talking about. And then the dog's just, so she disliked me immediately because I didn't do what she wanted me to do. And I disliked her immediately because she was telling me what to do. So we had this energy, and of course the dog, the whole session was just like goofing about, like being an absolute plonker because of all of the energy that was going And then we're all like pretending to be nice to each other. But now I understand, of course, she was showing me part of myself. But then I was just like, no, I'm right. And it's that, like, and I think that's been a big thing I've had to really work on, and see in myself, is when there's an element of when I've learned something new, and this sort of I'm right and I know all of it, and that energy, like, is just so, is it oppressive? It's just a bit, yeah.
Mhm.
Anyway, so once I became aware of that, I can laugh at it now. Like, I can see the humor in
Right.
myself if I'm ever being in that space, or my girlfriend will very starkly mirror it back to me.
I love it. I love it. It's so true. But again, it goes back to our obsession with the expert in our culture. And so
Yeah,
and that's
maybe.
that's very ego driven as well. Like I've got to defend where it is that I'm coming from because I know
Yeah.
more or what have you. Whereas it feels like what you've done now and what this kind of work has both required of you and facilitated is, and it's a great mirror for all of us, is how do we embrace a lens of curiosity? That just owning
Mm.
going into a session, I don't know what's going on. And the reality is none of us know what's going on. We don't. Like we pretend we do, but
Yeah.
we don't. Like,
Yeah.
and so
Yeah.
if we could actually be okay with that and how that
Mhm.
that creates opportunities for all kinds of possibilities. And it allows us,
Mm.
especially in the work that you're doing with the dogs, that you are picking up on those subtleties because you haven't occluded your vision with what you are expecting to see. You know, you're very
Mm.
present, you're very open, and you're getting those little subtle messages that are coming through in both like the physical behaviors of the dogs and what, you know, with what they're choosing to select, for example, but also
Yeah.
on that energetic level. And it's those subtleties that are really telling the story of what's going on and what we're being asked to do as a result.
Yeah. Oh, and that's such an important point to make. And I think as much as I love, like my parents were teachers, I've got a passion for learning. I've got a passion for learning. But it's every time I meet a dog or a client or a student, yeah, I've got this knowledge, but the most important skill that I can bring in is listening. And meeting that person, even if I've known them for decades, meeting them for the first time, knowing that I'm always different, they're always different. And it's that, like that expansiveness, that you're just much more open to listening and receiving wisdom and awareness when you're in that space of, as opposed to that, well, I know this is right, and that cognitive bias. We love being right, don't we? We love being right. We
Yeah.
absolutely, as a human species, that's such a big fear of, and a lot of my students, that was one of the things they would really struggle with, is that they'll look silly because people don't take them seriously because they don't necessarily have all the answers. And I'm like, that's brilliant, you don't have all the answers, you will never have
Mm-mm.
all the answers. That's not your focus. Your focus is to listen and be in that space of receiving, as opposed to, yeah, of course you're passing on information, but it's the listening. He's like, hey mama,
He's like, listen.
you
Yeah,
listen, you
I
listen.
know. You're such a good teacher, Lucky. You're so But it's so true, and it speaks to the fact that in that listening and in owning the fact that we don't know everything, it really gives us permission more than anything to really evolve and trust that we only, we started off talking with like, with the awakening process. And part of the awakening process is coming to the realization that all we ever have is this now moment. And so how can we let go of the past, which doesn't exist, and all of excuse me, all of the sort of stories we told ourselves about who we were, and simultaneously letting go of this idea of the future, all the stories we're telling ourselves about who we're going to be, and actually be really open to what is this moment showing me about myself. And with that, you have to let go of that idea of being the expert. You have to let go of the idea that you know everything in order to really open up to that. And that's hard for us to do. It's really hard. But going back to the dogs as teachers, I mean, is there an animal that's more present than a dog? I mean, honestly, it's unbelievable how they teach us about just pure presence. It's incredible.
Yeah, they're great at it. And there's so many versions of themselves, isn't there? Like, as much as, because we love a label as a human being, we love labels, don't we? And labels totally have their place, but it's our attachment to what that label means. Like, this is the good version of that label and this is the bad version. Whereas the dogs are always 100% just being themselves, and they're always, like, when I watch my pointer with dogs, she's different with every dog. Yes, she may have certain behaviors that she's practiced that she knows works, but she's different every time. And because that dog is different and it's a different season, as different, she's eating different food, I'm different, and it's notice. I think it's that bias, that cognitive bias, is we like to be right and we look for what is the same. We don't look for what is different. And that's one thing I've really learned to hone, is every day I'm noticing what is different about my dog, about me. And then the more you really focus and notice what is different, the more you see that
Yeah.
we are always changing, we are always evolving.
Exactly. And I would add on to that. I agree with you completely. We also look for what is probable based off of our past experience and not what is possible.
Mm.
And so we are really limiting what it is that we're perceiving, when in reality there are all of these possibilities in front of us if we just
Yeah,
open up to it.
yeah,
Absolutely.
100%. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I'm wondering if you could talk to us. You mentioned the course that you're doing with Dennis Lee and Murphy. I wonder if you could talk to us a little bit more about what that will look like and how people could sign up for that if they're interested.
Sure. So Dennis and I have been, well, I say we've been working together. We have, but I've been working under him, with him for 10 years, and he's an old friend from like my early 20s. But he, more recently, we kind of started to work together, so bringing in the animal side and his work with exiting what he calls the blame cycle, exiting the blame game. So we co-created the course called the Animal Reflections course, which is the course is all about you. So the 100% focus is on you, with our animals as guides, as giving us feedback about the shifts that are going on within us. So it's a 6-week. We ran one in September. The next one starts the 20th of April. And it's a completely immersive, experiential course where we take you through a process of offerings, and our focus is very much for people to come in and gather their own evidence. Like, we're not there to convince you, we're not there to, we're going to show you what we've experienced and what we've experienced, but we want the students to gather their own evidence so they go on their own journey. And because there'll be things that we offer that will be very counterintuitive and go against a lot of what they've been told, and it can be really jarring. So the way it's taught is we're going through it together. It's a very immersive journey. We give them the tools to basically effortlessly self-heal, so that as they shift, they then can see the shifts in their ecosystem, not just their animals, in their relationship. One of the ladies on the course last year said her relationship with her husband has completely changed. She says it's like going back to being together for the first time, because she's viewing him so entirely differently. So it's not just our relationship with our animals, it's our relationship with those others in our ecosystem. So it's a 6-week immersive course, and it's probably the best thing I've ever done. It's an absolute game changer, and it's really, even obviously being a facilitator on it, it's so freeing and healing, and the shifts that happen in it are just kind of mind-blowing, and it's really beautiful to be able to offer that.
Oh, amazing. And that's done online, completely online?
It's done online, so it's 6 weeks, one come on, Rachel, over a period of 6 weeks, Saturday, 2 to 3 hours, and then we give them workbooks to help integrate and experiment with what we're offering in between the classes. So
Amazing.
yeah, should be fun.
And can people learn about that and sign up for it on your website?
Correct. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
And I'll leave the link to all of that in the show notes as well for anyone who wants to check it out further.
yeah, sure.
Brilliant. If you could give some advice for somebody who would just like to, after listening to this talk and feeling inspired, like, ooh, I'm kind of curious about trying some self selection techniques with my dog. Like, what can I do right now? Is there some advice that you might give somebody if they just want to start experimenting with self selection themselves?
Yes, and it's so easy. First of all, I would say watch your dog out and about on walks. So I would watch them. Are there things that they're foraging for? But without even spending any money, I can guarantee you in your kitchen cabinet, you will have some herbs and spices that you can simply offer to your dog. So I know in my cupboard, I've got cinnamon, cardamom, fennel seeds, basil, or so just so putting them in front of your dog and seeing, is there one they want to sniff, is there one they're licking at? I think that is, for me, is the simplest way to start if you've got no experience of this yet, is to just start asking them questions and seeing what is it they're drawn to, and go from that place. And then that might be enough for some people, but others might, like me, go down the rabbit hole and just completely immerse themselves in the plant world and learn
Hmm.
about all the beautiful benefits that it brings.
Oh, so amazing. Oh, that's a great tip as well. Like, what have you got in your cupboard that's dog safe that you can just
Yeah.
offer to them and see what they do? And so, would you suggest doing that, for example, like on a platter, or are you physically in your hand putting it in front of the dog, or is there a best practice for that?
It depends on the dog.
Okay.
Um some some dogs will want it from the hands. Some dogs, if it's in your hands, they'll be like, I don't know. How would
Hmm.
I do it? I would do it probably on a board. I'd put a couple of things down, or you can just open up the bottle and let them have a smell first. And if they show a lot of interest, then put a little bit down and just see, do they what. So I did this with Cosmo quite a bit because he had some health issues towards the end, and he was a master at self selection. So his favorite thing was fennel seeds. So
Oh.
he would there were about 10 things on the chopping board, and he just would take the fennel seeds. And it was just beautiful. And green clay, that was his other thing.
Mm, mm.
So yeah, you can put them down, but some dogs, if it's new to them, they might be like, I'm not normally allowed to lick the chopping board, or I'm not going to sniff stuff from the cupboard. So just make sure you're giving them permission, because often that can be like they're like, oh, this is weird what you're doing. You're giving me choice.
Exactly. Exactly. And I've found as well, like I was saying that I've been doing with Lucky, is separating foods out and having a variety of different proteins, for example, in a meal, instead of it just being like the beef meal today. It's like, here's a little bit of beef, here's a little bit of cooked beef, here's a little bit of pork, here's a little bit of cooked pork, and seeing that there are certain times, especially now in the winter, for example, he's actually preferring lightly cooked foods. And I'm an advocate for fresh feeding, so I don't see a problem with lightly cooking. And I want to be able to give him things that he actually wants to eat. And he's like, well, this is a little bit nicer than cold, raw beef. And so
Yeah,
learning from him with that. Yeah,
man,
no,
he lives a good life.
he does. But, I always say, people say, oh, is he a rescue dog? And I'll say, yeah, but he's actually the rescuer. He is
Yeah,
definitely he is definitely the one in charge,
I
and
get
he's
that.
such a gift, such a gift. I'm so grateful for him, and I hope he knows that.
I'm sure he does.
Rachel, this has been such a wonderful conversation. We're going to have you back because there's so many more things that we can go into, and I'm really excited about that possibility. But I also wanted to ask you a question that I ask all of my guests. And you've kind of
Mhm.
talked a little bit about aspects of this, but I thought I'd give you an opportunity to reflect on it for yourself, kind of more specifically. And that is, what do you feel that dogs, whether it's dogs in general that you've worked with or your own dogs, have taught you and are teaching you about what it means to be human?
Mm. I think they keep it so simple. For me, dogs, we've massively overcomplicated the healing process. And if you have a dog in your home, you know, they are constantly there guiding you, giving you that like no bullshit version of who you honestly are. And from all the whole spectrum, the bits you like, the bits you don't like. And I think when we keep it that simple, like our dogs are our ultimate mirrors for what it is we have yet to heal and learn about ourselves. Did that answer the question? I feel like I've
Yeah.
gone in a bit of a sec,
No,
but I just
absolutely.
think I like to keep things so simple, and I think maybe that is one of the joys of dogs is they, as humans, we love the intellectual dopamine, don't we? We love, and I get that, like I love learning about things, but actually I love the simplicity of dogs, how life can be really simple if we listen to them in a different way.
Oh, that's beautiful. Just perfect. Thank you so much. Is there anything
You're
else you
welcome.
want our Mystic Dog Mama community to know?
Ah, I think also there's a tendency, and I know I do this, I sometimes take life too seriously. And the healing journey can be a really challenging one and a really difficult one with our dogs. Like we have this idea in of our heads what it'll look like to have a dog. And very often that's like our conscious idea. And it doesn't always match our conscious idea, but the unconscious one, it absolutely does. But I think it's knowing that life shouldn't always be taken too seriously as well. Like to enjoy the fun bits as well as the difficult bits.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
This has been such a pleasure, and Lucky's really enjoyed it too. He's like, this is great.
He's got
I'm
the
involved.
he's got the best ears.
Oh my gosh. Well, you know what's funny about his ears too is they've pretty much been the same size since he was a puppy. So if you imagine him like as a little puppy with these giant ears, and especially when they go through the phase as a puppy where the cartilage is just starting to form and the ears will randomly pop
Right.
up, and you have like the
Right.
one giant ear like a radar.
Yeah.
It's
Oh,
beautiful.
look at his face.
Oh, I know. Kisses. Rachel,
Thank
thank
you.
you so much for this. This has been such a gift and such a wonderful way to spend my day. So thank you so much.
You're welcome for the tangents. You're very welcome.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much and take care.
No worries.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode with Rachel Knott. I hope you enjoyed it. What was your biggest takeaway? Have you tried self-selection with your dog before? Are you curious about trying it? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences. Send me a message on Instagram at Mystic Dog Mama. And while you're at it, please subscribe to the podcast, rate it, and review it. It really helps others find the podcast. And let me know what other topics you'd like me to cover to help you live your best Mystic Dog Mama or Papa life with your own pup. Again, you can reach me on Instagram at Mystic Dog Mama. If you're interested in learning more about Rachel and her work, including her upcoming Animal Reflections course with author Dennis Liam Murphy, which starts on the 20th of April, I've left links to her website in the show notes. And finally, just a quick note to let you know that this episode was supported by Aspirationary, which, in full transparency, is another project of mine. At Aspirationary, we make books, notebooks, and stationery to help you become all you aspire to be. You can check out our shadow work and moon magic journals and workbooks on Instagram at Aspirationary. That's spelled ASPIRATIONERY. Thank you so much for being here with me. I'll see you next time.